to the workshop. I'm Steve. The little clip of video you saw at the beginning was actually of my rock tumblers working. I've got 5 of them rumbling away at the moment, and I thought I'd show you that to try and convince you that I actually know what I'm talking about. And I also have 2 batches of stone that finished this week. One lot finished on Tuesday and the other on Friday, and we'll have a quick look at those because they're pertinent. There are some stones in here that are pertinent to what we're going to be talking about today, which is why so many people seem to fail at rock tumbling or struggle to get a really good polish on their stones. There's an awful lot of myth and made up reasons, and quite honestly ridiculous reasons floating around on the internet about rock tumbling, and I thought I would put some of those straight. And I'm going to give you now the 4 main reasons why you might not be getting the best results out of your rock tumbling, and I hope by showing you my rock tumblers and by showing you these rocks and also telling you that I've been a stone and marble mason since I was 15 years old. So I have a kind of background in stone, and which gives me a fairly good understanding of the way that natural stones can vary and change, which most people just don't have that background. So join me in the workshop and we'll go through the 4 main reasons why your rock tumbling might be failing. Before we start, let's have a quick look at these 2 batches of stones. There's nothing special about them, nothing extraordinary. This is usually the standard that I expect to get out of a rock tumble. In fact, this batch here is slightly below standard. But you can see, I hope, that these have got, on the whole, they've got an absolutely brilliant polish. And I've been rock tumbling for 4 years, and I'm a great one for experimenting. And on this particular batch, I was kind of playing around with polishing flat faces. You can see this one here is rather nice, and it's done very well. I'm very pleased at that. Really thin bit of chalcedony, and there's a flat surface there. Again, it's got a great polish. Almost all of these have got a great polish, but not all of them, and we'll come back to that later. With this particular batch, I was trying out polishing some stones that were particularly random shaped, quite rough and heavy duty, and they've come out pretty good. But again, there's 1 or 2 in here that haven't polished very well, and that's a pointer, and it might be a pointer as to why you're struggling with your stones. But let's talk about reason number 4, the 4th most likely reason why your tumbling is struggling, and that is the use or misuse of soap or borax in the mixture. Lots of rock tumblers on YouTube recommend the use of it, but they don't really go into it very well. The reason that you would use something like soap or borax is to make the water mix, the slurry mix, more viscous. You have to think about what's happening when your tumbler is rumbling round. It's going round in circles. What do you want to be happening? I think in general the most important thing is lots and lots of movement. You want all of these stones to be rolling around, rumbling against each other, carrying the grit round at whatever stage you're at. You want it to be carrying the grit all round and through the stones and getting yourself a decent polish on your rocks. And one way of doing that is to add soap or borax. Now, I tried both soap and borax. I was reasonably successful in using borax. I found it improved my results quite a lot, but it was a little bit intermittent. It was a bit hit and miss. Sometimes it worked really well, and sometimes it didn't seem to work all that well. And soap, I had real problems with soap. Because if you put too much soap in, the whole mix gets thick and heavy and doesn't move. I actually had one batch that I actually had to sort of trowel out of the barrel. It went so thick. So if you use too much soap, it goes too thick, and if you use too little soap, it just doesn't have any effect. It doesn't have the right effect. So I find it a bit hit and miss. What I do now, almost exclusively without using any other additive, is I use plastic beads like these. And these are little plastic beadlets. I've made a video on using them, and since I've been using them, my results have been almost entirely successful, unless I'm doing something silly, and I often do silly things just to try them out. So my recommendation is stop using soap, stop using borax, get yourself some beads. There's nothing complicated or difficult about it. Simply don't use them at the first stage. It doesn't need it. The first stage of tumbling is very aggressive and will very quickly provide its own slurry and thicken up the water pretty quickly on its own. You don't need them. But after that, just stick in, 1 or 2 tablespoonfuls of beads. The only really critical thing about beads is that you have to use them at the same stage. You have to keep them separate. So these beads, I don't know if you can see that. As you can see, the pot says polishing beads. So these beads I would only use at the polishing stage. I've got similar pots for each stage, 220, 400, and then polishing. So that's the first reason. That's reason number 4, which I think goes a long way to explain why some people are really struggling with their polishing. So down to reason number 3. And I think this is a real issue. I think it's quite a big issue. It's the quality of the polish that you're using. Not all polishes are equal. Most people will be using either aluminium oxide, they might be using zinc oxide. In the UK, zinc oxide is commonly sold, tin oxide or cerium oxide. And I've done a big test, and again I've made a video on that. If you want to be convinced, go and have a look at the test, check out my channel. And in that, there's no doubt at all that many polishes don't work very well. I found zinc oxide didn't work very well. It didn't create a very good polish. I never use it anymore. I've got it up on the shelf and I just don't know what I'll do with it. I found a lot of the aluminium oxide polishes, in fact all of the ones that you can buy in the UK, are simply too coarse. They're really not a proper polish, and yet they are sold in various outlets as being a polish. They're mostly 1200 grit, and that's way too coarse for a polish. The two that I found work best were tin oxide or cerium oxide. I use either of those. I prefer tin oxide, and I get this great polish on these stones using tin oxide. And I found cerium oxide in the big test. I did a really big test. I found the cerium oxide to be almost as good. And the other thing is, the thing to bear in mind, you'll look at it and you'll think it's quite expensive. But in actual fact, I didn't find that. I don't find that, because I only use about half as much. I only use 1 tablespoon of polish in a £3 barrel, and that does the job perfectly well. So think about your polish, see what you're using, and if you're not sure, buy a small amount of tin oxide or cerium oxide and try that out and see how you get on. But of course, if the other things are not in line, no amount of good polishing will do the job. You have to get all these 4 factors in place before the polish will work well. But trust me, if you're doing everything else right, then the polishing, you'll start to get these absolutely wonderful results. How about reason number 2? I think it's probably one of the big reasons why a lot of people fail in their rock tumbling or struggle with their rock tumbling. And it's quite simply that at the first stage of tumbling, you're not tumbling enough. I personally believe that the first stage of tumbling is the single most important stage of rock tumbling. It will set the scene for whether you're going to succeed or fail. You really need to think about a strategy that works for you at the first stage. If you've got multiple barrels, more than one barrel, it's pretty easy. I would suggest that you have one barrel running all the time at the first stage. That's at 40, 60 or 80 grit stage, running all the time. You just refresh it at least once a week. You quickly wash them out. You pick out the stones that are really good and ready to go on to the next stage, and the others you bung back in the barrel, and you top up with other stones that need to be tumbled at the first stage. If you've only got one barrel, it's a bit more of a problem, because how long do you leave it? There's a great myth that you stick all the stones in at the first stage for 10 days or something like that. But the fact is, half your stones simply won't be tumbled. I mean, if you look at a stone like this is a rough stone, it's not been tumbled at all. But to get that in a condition to send on to the polishing, the next stage of tumbling, is probably going to take, I don't know, 8 weeks of tumbling at the first stage, maybe 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 weeks. It's going to take a long time. Something like this will take even longer. On the other hand, if you get a stone like this straight off of the beach, look how smooth and rounded that is. That stone will probably only take about 3 days at the first stage. So you can't accommodate all your stones with one rule. You have to come up with a strategy that makes you that you can deal with, that you can cope with. The important thing is to get them smooth. Right, so reason number one, the big numero uno. The main reason why a lot of tumblers fail is because they're picking up local stones which look really attractive, but in fact inherently won't polish. And there's a very simple test that will tell you whether a stone will polish or not. If you look at this stone, there we are, sorry. It's got a lovely crystal effect. It looks very shiny and you would think it would polish beautifully. But if you simply get a craft knife or a Stanley knife or a pen knife and scrape it across the surface, I don't know if you can see that, but it's scratched. The simple test to start with is that if you can scratch it with a knife, with a pen knife or a craft knife, it almost certainly is too soft to polish. If you compare it to this nice shiny lump of stone, no, you didn't see that, sorry, let's do that again. This, and trust me, I'm leaning on this, and this is a sharp blade, I'm going to cut a hole in my hand, and it hasn't marked it at all. The lesson is, the harder the stone, the better it'll polish. It seems perverse, but it's true. So the first test is hardness. The second test is a visual one. This is a piece of stone which I would think of cutting this up and polishing it, and it might even be hard enough to withstand the knife test, but in fact it isn't. You can actually see bits of scratching going on, but not on some of it. So on some of this stone it scratches, these darker veins, it scratches, and the lighter veins, these lovely pink veins, which are pink quartz, hold on, right, let's start again. So in these darker patches it'll actually scratch, and you can see the scratching taking place, I think, trust me, it's there. But the lighter coloured stone, which is pink quartz, that's not scratching. That's hard enough to withstand the scratching from the knife. What that means is when it's tumbling, the softer parts will tumble away and leave you with great big holes, and the pink part will polish, which is exactly the effect you get if you try and polish something like granite. If you look at this granite, it takes a beautiful polish. As you can see, it's the sort of thing that they make kitchens and what have you out of. But if you turn it over, you can see all the component parts it's made up from. I mean, you can see it easier on the polished side. It's made up of lots and lots of platelets of different minerals. And some of those minerals will be softer than others. Some will be very hard, some will be relatively soft. And I've tried tumbling granite and failed miserably. It just, that composite nature of the stone, you can see it on the edge. That composite nature of the stone means that it doesn't tumble very well. Stones like that don't tumble. So the hardness test, there's another, is a visual test of just looking at a stone, and if it looks quite porous, quite, you know, holy on the surface, just on a surface level, it probably is too soft to tumble. It's a kind of visual thing. I would be very dubious about it. You can always try scratching it, and in this case it didn't scratch. It's got a slightly porous surface. I'd be dubious about it until I did the scratch test, and then I'd say, well, that's worthy of a go. And it's what I was saying about being aware of how natural stones can vary. Their nature can vary and be quite confusing at first. The other thing to be aware of is stones like this. Just the colour alone would put me off this. It's got a lovely bit of veining running through it. And that again is quartz veining, and it's probably, you know, chalcedony or something in that red veining. It's quite an attractive stone. But I actually tried polishing this and it didn't polish. It came out of the barrel like this. It's just the nature of the stone. Be wary of stones that seem to have two completely different natures. So that, I think, is the number one reason why people fail at their tumbling. They're simply putting stones in their barrel that are the wrong type of stones. They won't polish. You may have, for example, you may live in an area that has a lot of slate, and you go down your beach and there are slate pebbles. Slate won't polish, just will not polish, and it certainly won't polish in a rock tumbler. Any sort of composite stone that looks as though it's made up of lots of different minerals, you should be dubious about. Give them a go, but know that you're taking the risk. So there you are, the 4 main reasons that I think people fail in their rock tumbling. So as I say, I hope this helps you, and if it does, please let me know in the comments down below. If you think it's a load of old tosh, also let me know down in the comments below, but let me know why you think it's tosh, okay? Thanks for watching.